evidence that supports this theory. And why we are studying this theory is because a lot of biology is understood through this lens of evolution, through this theory. All right, so we're going to go through a bunch of different things. We have a worksheet you guys will work through, and then a quiz at the end of class as well. Okay, so don't start the quiz. The quiz at the end of class is just going to be outline a few evidences of evolution and explain them. Okay, so that's what we're going through right now. All right. So this is actually on the next lecture, the next video lecture. I couldn't get it to format very well in this format. But anyway, so what is evolution? Well, it's based on a few observations. The first is that in populations, you have variance in traits. And we can especially see this in populations that are sexually reproducing. Okay, so you look around, not everybody looks the same. There's lots of variation there. All species can produce more offspring than their environment can support. Okay, so there's humans have kind of found a way around this in a number of ways, but still there are more people born than that end up becoming adults. And then inferences from that is there must be some traits which allow individuals to be able to survive better than other individuals. And that leads to an accumulation of favorable traits in populations. Okay? So, if you were to define evolution, you have to also qualify it with what is causing the evolution. And for most things that we talk about in biology, we're talking about natural selection. Okay, when we go through microevolution on Wednesday, we'll kind of reinforce this concept as well. Okay, what are other ways that you can show evolution? Yes.
I mean, pretty much just like the basic definition of evolution, the changes of the genotype of each species over time. So like how you mentioned in the video lecture, the finches on the Galapagos Islands,
Mm-hmm.
They had many, many different breeds based off each island, and that's how you can tell if evolution is occurring pretty much based off how they said one finch maybe came from the mainland, and then over periods of years, you have 20 different types of finches.
Good. Yes. So would that be natural selection for finches? Yes, it would be natural selection. All right. What about other than natural selection? Yes.
Fossil record?
Okay. In the fossil record, we can show kind of a progression of species to modern day species. Is that natural selection or another? It's natural selection as well. Okay. Is there something besides natural selection where you can see evolution? Yes, there is. No, you're going to tell me. Pokemon. No. No, but you're close. What was Pokemon made by?
Nintendo.
Okay, good. Artificial selection. So you can also show evolution by artificial selection. Okay, what is artificial selection? Okay, selective breeding, breeding dogs. These are examples. This is where humans, okay, we are not natural, we're saying, because of our conscious abilities, we can act in a specific direction. Let's say we want to make a smaller dog. You can just pick the smallest puppy, breed it with another small puppy, do that for generations and generations, and then you get Chihuahuas, okay? But that was not something that's going to happen naturally, right? You put a Chihuahua out with a pack of wolves, it's not going to survive very long, okay? Chihuahuas are not natural, no. They look nothing like a wolf, okay? But artificial selection shows that you can, manipulate traits within the variation of that's already within the species to make different kinds of things. Yes.
Don't we do that with plants a lot, as far
Yeah.
as bearing larger fruit?
Yes. Yeah. Agricultural examples are very abundant, right? And so the apple that you eat today, that's nothing like the wild apple that existed, thousands of years ago when they first decided to cultivate apples, because they selected for bigger fruit and more fruit per tree. Yes, good. Okay, so that's evolution by natural selection. All right, so we have some things in the fossil record which really give a lot of evidence to this theory. A couple of transitionary fossils that I wanted to point out to you are Tiktaalik, so that's this one on the top here, and Archaeopteryx. Who's heard of Archaeopteryx before? And this one's commonly brought up in elementary school even. Tiktaalik is a little less well known. But there's the actual fossil of Tiktaalik, and why is it? It's considered a transitionary species because it has some fish characteristics and some amphibian characteristics. Okay, so fish characteristics, it had fish scales, and it had gills. But it also seemed to have lungs. Okay, so this was one of the transitionary fossils where they think it was like a lungfish. Yeah, it went out of the water and was able to access oxygen just straight out of the air. It also has a neck. Okay, fish don't have necks, right? They're all just like connected. But this neck allowed it to lift its head out of water and probably had a little bit of movement from side to side, not anything like you or I have. And then it also had a pectoral girdle. Okay, and a pectoral girdle is what's going to hold your limbs in place so that you can push up on the ground. Okay, so this is thought to have been an aquatic species, but also able to walk on land with its front limbs. Okay, Archaeopteryx is a transitionary fossil from bird and reptile or dinosaur. Okay, so it has a lot of interesting dinosaur-like characteristics, including teeth. Okay, birds don't have teeth. Okay, so they just have the beak, no teeth on it. But it also had feathers. Okay, so this is one of the kind of the, you can see the feathers a little bit in the fossil itself. And this was very surprising to scientists when they found it, because most of the skeleton looks like a dinosaur, including it also has a tail. Okay, birds don't have tails. They have tail feathers, but all the vertebrae that used to make a tail are all squished and fused into one
How
bone.
did they find the feathers? Those biodegrade.
Yeah, for some reason well, everything biodegrades, but
Yeah.
it shows, you can kind of see it. This isn't actually a very good picture of it, but you can see some of the feathers.
Okay.
Fossilized.
Fossil remains. Gotcha.
Yeah. Okay, so, and they've found a lot of fossils since then which support the idea that birds evolved from dinosaurs. Okay, and so you may even say that dinosaurs still exist today. They just exist in the form of birds. Okay. All right, so those are some interesting transitionary fossils found in the fossil record. Yes?
When they find these like transition fossils, how can they tell if it's a bird changing to a reptile or a reptile changing to a bird? Or if
Well, that's a good question. So they look at the fossil record, okay? So you can age based on where it shows up in the which layer it shows up into.
Okay, so just like, for example, before they found, or before, in the fossil record, before this fossil, there weren't any birds.
Right. There wasn't any fossils that showed feathers,
Okay.
or that showed these bird-like characteristics. And then later you'll find there are, yeah.
Okay.
Yes.
This is kind of a weird question,
But not a stupid one.
not a stupid one.
Okay.
Because it has basis in the real science.
Yes.
Someone told me that some scientists have been experimenting with a gene they found in chickens that they can sort of switch on and off to basically have the chicken be born as a dinosaur type thing, but that they never got to hatch. Do you know anything about that?
No.
That
Sounds
super
interesting.
far-fetched.
But it's kind of related. Embryonic birds will show little teeth. Okay, so as they're developing, they'll have teeth first, and then they'll resorb into just beaks. Okay, so that's another evidence of evolution. Ontogeny recapitulates phylogeny, which basically means when you look at the development of modern day animals or organisms, they show a very similar pattern to what we can see in the fossil record. Okay, so those are two important ones, good ones to know for an exam. Okay, so some of the events we talked about in detail in the video lecture, the data that Darwin put together to form his hypothesis. And so I wanted to write a few of those on just a timeline here. Okay, so in 1859, Darwin published his book on the origin of species. Okay? The year before that, or this wasn't the first time evolution had occurred as a hypothesis. So actually, years before that, Lamarck had a different idea of how evolution took place, but it wasn't founded. In 1858, this is when Darwin and Alfred Wallace published their paper on natural selection. So Darwin had been writing this book for years, compiling all this evidence. Wallace, and I think through a friend, noticed that Wallace was also making these same connections, and so they came together and published a paper. And then the next year, Darwin published his big book on it. He's a different color. In 1860, but what were some of the criticisms of Darwin's book, or of Darwin's theory? There were three of them.
Was one of the criticisms that there hadn't been enough years, the Earth wasn't as old as they thought, and so they only thought it was 1,000 years old, so therefore evolution couldn't have taken place.
Right. So at this point, there's still a lot of this belief that the Earth was only 6,000 years old, which wouldn't have been enough time. Yes?
No method of inheritance.
All right. So there's no method of inheritance. They didn't know how the traits were passed from one to the other. And then there was a third one. You remember the other one?
Fossil.
Right. So it wasn't supported very well in the fossil record at this point. In 1860, that's when actually Archaeopteryx was found. Okay, it was found in Germany. There have been a number of fossils since then, which fall in that same genus of Archaeopteryx.
Let's go.
Archaeopteryx. Archaeopteryx. I had to look it up before class. Okay, so there's, and that didn't settle the debate, but that was one transitionary fossil which was found, which supported evidence. Oh, there are missing links in the fossil record, and found many since. So in 1900, the work of Gregor Mendel was discovered. Okay, Mendel actually did his, I think he was dead at this point. He actually did his work around the same time that Darwin was doing his work, but they just never crossed paths, and it wasn't discovered until the early 1900s that here somebody showed, oh, this is how things are passed. You have genes that are passed from one generation to the other. Okay, in 1953, to kind of add to that, the structure of DNA by Watson and Crick. Okay, understanding the structure of DNA now gave a little more teeth to what DNA was, what genes were, and how they were copied from one generation to the next. And then in 1973, a scientist by the name of Dobzhansky published a work entitled Nothing in Biology. I'm not going to have enough work there, space there. I'm going to put it down here. Yeah, let me finish the sentence. Okay, and I'm not going to put direct quotes in there because I'm not sure if that's the direct quote, but nothing in biology makes sense except in light of evolution. So here, biology at this point, or evolution at this point, was more widely accepted as the most sound theory for how organisms, or why there are so many species that are on the earth today and the diversity of species that are there. Okay? And then in 2003, the Human Genome Project was completed, where a human's DNA from beginning to end was decoded. And this, again, opened up what we can now do with DNA, and sequencing human DNA is the same process for sequencing other animals, and now we can make a lot of inferences for what are the relatedness in different species. Okay, so the ones in red are events in history which added to our understanding of the theory of evolution, and we're in support of it. Okay. Any questions on that? All right, so I have a video here. Okay, and I'm just going to play the video, and I want you to tell me how this contributes to, or doesn't contribute, whatever your opinion may be, in the theory of evolution.
So what we ended up building was basically a petri dish, except that it's 2 feet by 4 feet. And the way we set it up is that there are 9 bands, and at the base of each of these bands, we put a normal petri dish thick agar with different amounts of antibiotic. On the outside, there's no antibiotic. Just in from that, there's barely more than the E. coli can survive. Inside of that, there's 10 times as much, 100 times, and then finally the middle band has 1,000 times as much antibiotic. And then across the top of it, porous and thin agar, that bacteria can move around it. The background is black because there's ink in it, and the bacteria appear as white. First, you see they spread in the area where there's no antibiotic, up until the point they can no longer survive. Then a mutant appears on the right. It's resistant to the antibiotic, it spreads until it starts to compete with other mutants around it. When these mutants hit the next boundary, they too have to pause and develop new mutations to make it into 10 times as much antibiotic. Then you see the different mutants repeat this at 100. And after about 11 days, they finally make it into 1,000 times as much antibiotic as the wild type can survive. And so we can see by this process of accumulating successive mutations that bacteria, which are normally sensitive to an antibiotic, can evolve resistance to extremely high concentrations in a short period of time.
Okay, so what type of evolution was displayed there? Okay, yeah, evolution by artificial selection. This wasn't something that has occurred naturally, but something similar has occurred naturally in the form of MRSA. You guys remember that from the video? So methicillin is an antibiotic commonly used to treat bacterial infections. And there are certain types of bacteria which are resistant, similar to what they demonstrated here. So another thing this demonstrates is how evolution is important for your daily life. If you contract a flesh-eating bacteria, it's a life-threatening condition. And if they will try all sorts of combination of antibiotics to try and kill it, but sometimes they're completely resistant to any antibiotic we have. Right. So I wanted to briefly kind of touch on some of the religious aspect, I guess, of evolution. Because most of the criticisms now of evolution don't come within the scientific body. It's more outside from a religious point of view. You could kind of create a gradation of how people think about evolution. Creationism is basically that a literal biblical timeline, if you can say that.
So basically the idea that Earth was created in 7 days, including everything just bam, 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 really quick like that?
Well, or 6,000 years. Okay, so I guess there's another verse in the Bible that says the day in the life of God is like 1,000 years of man.
Right.
So that means that the earth is 6,000 years old, and they're coming from that bias, and so they try to fit everything that's known about evolution or creation within that interpretation. Kind of a step up from that, intelligent design, is that there is a creator, and the complexity or as evidenced by the complexity of biology. So, for example, the human eye is so complex, the argument is that couldn't have ever evolved. You couldn't ever get to something so complex. It must have had some design to it. Okay, theistic evolution then is the creator used evolution to create life, humans and everything else. And then atheistic evolution, that there is no God. And evolution is all we need to understand life. Okay, part of the problem with this is it tries to combine two fields which are otherwise coming at truth in different ways. Evolution, so a lot of people you hear the question, do you believe in evolution? Okay? But science is not supposed to be something you necessarily believe. It's a theory in which you have evidence which supports or doesn't support this theory. And so when you come at it from that angle, evolution is, by natural selection, is the best theory that explains processes in biology. Okay? Science is still open to other theories, but they still need to be able to be tested by science, right? Whereas religion is not a science. You can study religions as you would science, but it's not following the same science. So if you try and combine these two, then you might come to some sort of contradictions. But if you separate them, then I think you can understand they're coming in from different places. All right. I guess where they do come into clash again, though, is when, especially actually in the South, is where kind of the concentration of this, where a creationist or intelligent design, people try and push those to be taught as science. But those are not theories which are supported in science. So you can't, and they want equal time to be taught with evolution as creationism or intelligent design or something else. All right. So anyway, I just wanted to touch on that. Does anyone have questions about this or anything? So another thing, it's okay to believe that the earth is 6,000 years old. And that God created it just the way as it's said in the Bible. Like, I don't think there's anything wrong with that. But at the same time, it's not science. So you can't teach it as science. At the same time, you wouldn't teach, evolution in, over the pulpit, right? It's a scientific theory. It's not a spiritual theory that affects your salvation, right? So anyway, that's my 2 cents on. All right, that's all that I have for you on this. Stick there.